Superflex draft is all about the quarterbacks, right? Well, kinda. QBs obviously get a lot more important when you need to start two of them. But the key to winning your Superflex draft might actually be when not to draft a quarterback. We invited a special guest to help us run through a Superflex mock draft. We're talking where the elite tier ends at QB, when you should draft your second, and what that should mean for the rest of your roster. An all-new Draft Sharks podcast starts right now. Matt Schauf and Shane Hallam of DraftSharks.com here, and we've got a special guest to continue a series that we actually started early last month. Theo Greminger is a lead fantasy analyst at Fantasy Points, where he hosts a pair of podcasts in addition to delivering written content. Theo, I know it's a new gig for you, but I've known you for a while, previously with Player Profiler, and before that, just one of the best high-stakes players around, FFPC, NFFC, Redraft, Dynasty. I know you competed with us in the Draft Sharks Invitational a few years back. You've been going hard on content over the past few years. I'm happy to see you land a full-time gig doing this stuff. I know that playing fantasy was probably already a full-time gig for you before that. I appreciate you joining us here. It's good to hang with you.
No, it's always good chopping it up with you, Matt. A ton of respect for what you guys do at Draft Sharks. Jared, I guess, was scared to compete in this mock draft against us, but big shout out to Shane and Jared as well. So yeah, excited to do this, and I appreciate the kind words. It's crazy this time of year. I feel like people are drafting earlier and earlier, and you feel like you kind of have to get a little bit of early skin in the game because some of those ADP movements and all that. FFPC is doing early main events this year. It's just wild times in fantasy football, but it's amazing.
Yeah, and speaking of crazy this time of year, Theo, I know you're in downstate New York. I'm in Western New York. Like, I was at my daughter's soccer games yesterday. I had 2 pairs of pants on. It was June 1st. What's the weather like for you? Are you ready for it to get out of hoodie time too?
100%. I had a hoodie on this morning on Long Island down here, and it's June. It's just a little bit odd. We never get good weather for Memorial Day. It's sort of a rule. I know upstate you guys don't as well, but Memorial Day is always a little bit of a tease because we always have like a good weather spell right beforehand, and then it's like 60 degrees on Memorial Day weekend. But it'll be summer soon enough.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing. Shane, what's it like out for you? Are you cold?
Yeah, we're in day like 120 of winter here in Pittsburgh as well. So I feel you guys both.
Well, we did not ask Theo today so that we could talk about the weather. We've got him here because we're mock drafting, as you could probably already guess from the title of the show that you clicked on to get here, or, the draft grid that's on your screen if you're on YouTube right now. Last month, we did a Dynasty Superflex rookie mock draft with Jacob Gibbs from CBS. Today, we're going to go Superflex again, but we're going to go redraft this time. And it's timed out pretty well because I know Underdog just put out its Superflex puppy. So there are Superflex drafts out there. Jared, as Theo already alluded to, could not join us for this one, unfortunately, because he's on daddy duty, but it's going to be his loss because when he's not here, I get to talk bad about the players that he likes better than I do, and he's not around to defend them. So we're going to go ahead and attack Jared's favorites and then see what he says afterward. Quick setup before we get to the draft. It is Superflex, like I mentioned, PPR scoring, standard lineup otherwise, 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, 1 non-QB flex spot. We're probably going to go about 10 rounds here. We'll see exactly what the time dictates. We don't want to go on for too long. We're drafting on Sleeper in case you didn't recognize it on your screen. I'm going to go in real quick now and set up my draft war room because, usually you'll want to have this set up ahead of your draft so you can fully get prepared. I haven't done it for this one because I want to be able to show you that even if you forget or you're, just running late, you can go right there from your Sleeper draft room. I'm already signed into Draft Sharks, sync my league, choose Sleeper. It's doing the work for me while I talk on a microphone about absolutely nothing or about why I'm wearing a hoodie on June 2nd in my own basement. Finishes up, and then in a minute, I'm going to have my draft war room ready. I'm going to have pick recommendations as we go. It knows the format. It gets all the settings in there, and it's got that sidebar in the Sleeper draft room for me. Now I'm going to minimize that window so I don't give anything away to Theo and Shane as I drafted. Theo, I want, before we get to your pick to kick things off, what kind of basic strategies do you carry into a Superflex draft? What are you trying to do early on?
So I think if you have one of the early selections, you'd be a little bit foolish not to dive into the elite quarterbacks. But I think when it comes to the middle of the first round, like where Shane is picking, you don't want to just take quarterback because you kind of lose your edge. If I'm going up against Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen or Jaden Daniels for that matter, with like the QB8 in round 1, I don't think that necessarily gives me as much of an edge. So I think you really need to know your tiers a little bit better in Superflex, know when you should dive into the other elite positions, know sort of where the edge is at quarterback, whether you're using fantasy points projections, draft sharks projections, have very good projections that you trust where you can understand where the value is at quarterback. And of course, anytime you dive into a new format, make sure you really, really know your scoring inside out. It sounds very simplistic, but knowing your league scoring inside out can be a little bit better of an edge than maybe your league mates have. Switching from sleeper to NFFC to FFPC to underdog, people sort of get in a rut and don't necessarily know the scoring settings. So make sure you know those sort of things. But I think really for me in Superflex, it's is the edge quarterback? And if not, when do I pivot? And then also pay attention to the positional runs. A lot of times people will say zig when others zag, but in Superflex, it's such a finite number of starting quarterbacks that if there's a crazy quarterback run, sometimes you have to know when to dive in it instead of just saying, "Hey, I'm smarter than everyone. I'm going to go ahead and let these suckers pick quarterbacks." Because you could end up holding the bag.
Several great points in there. I mean, one, the league scoring, not only is it easy if you are drafting across multiple formats to kind of forget the nuances between them, even if you're just drafting on a single one or if you play in a couple of leagues, every year I find guys who are like, wait a second, these guys get this many points for that, or wait, this league does, kick return scoring. You have got to check all of your scoring settings, even if it's a league that you play every single year. Just check to make sure that the commission didn't do anything screwy or even mess something up, because there are edges to mine there. Superflex, is fun because it's different and it does, make those position runs even more likely. And it makes it more important to figure out what to do with those. You mentioned tiers, and they're especially important here because, like you said, finite number of quarterbacks. So sometimes you do want to take the next quarterback and avoid getting frozen out. But other times you're like, these guys are all chasing this tier that's like 8 quarterbacks large. So I'm going to go to a different position here. And I know that somebody from this tier is still going to be available the next time my turn comes around.
For sure. I mean, a fantastic point, Matt. And, it's about just being organized for any single draft. I think a lot of times in this day and age, we're in so many drafts, but it's about putting that little extra bit of time, especially if it's your big, important leagues towards the end of the summer, being really, really, really prepared. So Superflex fun, man. I'm in a lot of the puppy but Superflex drafts, and those have been really, really fun. I know we're doing redraft, that's best ball, but you can get a little bit of skin in the game in some of these early Superflexes. Get yourself prepared.
Yeah, certainly not totally different best ball versus what we're doing here. Not exactly the same format, but you should be able to get something out of this if you are doing Superflex drafts on Underdog right now. I'm glad too that those points that you brought up, Theo, because if you check the Draft Shark Superflex draft strategy article right now on the site, our first 2 points are: 1, don't overvalue QBs in Superflex. That gets to what Theo was talking about. You target that elite tier, but then at some point in round 1, even, you're looking at the top players at other positions. And then 2, target other positions during some of those early QB runs. And, we already touched on that. We'll get into that as we get into the draft and see where those quarterbacks start going. Theo is our guest, so he's up first. Theo, who do you like at the top of this elite QB tier?
It's Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has the most team continuity of him and Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels, my big 3 quarterbacks. I have Lamar Jackson ranked the highest in my rankings over at Fantasy Points. He was the QB1 last year. He's the best bet to lead all quarterbacks in rushing yardage. And Baltimore is my pick to lead the NFL in team points per game. They're just an offensive machine. Lamar had 41 passing touchdowns last year, a massive step forward, completely clicking in the Todd Monken offense. This is an offense that's really, really easy to bet on.
Yeah, Lamar Jackson's been our top quarterback as well. For me personally, I like Josh Allen because I think he's a safer bet versus how they've produced over their respective careers. I wonder if people realize how much Lamar Jackson's top seasons have relied on high-level passing touchdown rates. So I'm not arguing against Lamar Jackson being the first quarterback, and it's really splitting hairs among these guys. I think any of the top 4 really you can make an argument for in that top spot. Shane, what are you going with here at 6?
It's a little bit tough for me. I have kind of a tier of 4 quarterbacks that I really like at the high end. So as Theo talked about before we started, 106, not necessarily going quarterback, but I think Jalen Hurts is worth the pick. And like I said, the bottom of that top tier, I like him, Lamar, Allen, and Daniels all together there. I mean, you get the rushing. Tush Push is staying this year. So for redraft, I'm all in on those short touchdowns for Jalen Hurts. And I think that offense is going to continue rolling. I even think Saquon Barkley could take a step back, and that could mean more passing for Hurts than we saw last season.
Yeah, Theo, you talked about the elite QB tier. How big is that tier for you?
Yeah, I pushed Joe Burrow in there. I think it's Jackson, Allen, Daniels, then Hurts and Burrow. But I think you could kind of make an argument that Jackson, Allen, and Daniels, for that matter, I think is going to take a big step forward. I think they're in their own little mini tier. And then I think Hurts and Burrow behind them are in their own little mini tier. So for me, I think that the first round looks about correct. I'm betting on a number of these year 2 quarterbacks to take a big step forward. So some of those guys like Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, very, very enticing. Of course, guys like Patrick Mahomes and also Baker Mayfield, for that matter, are very enticing as well. So I feel very, very comfortable with any of those top 5 quarterbacks. And then after that, it's sort of like we talked about with the edge. You know, does it come down to, like, when we're talking about quarterback 6 versus a guy like Justin Jefferson? I might lean in the direction of a Justin Jefferson.
It sounds like I'm with you. If I'm team 4 or team 5 here, I'm taking a quarterback. I like Hurts and Burrow there. I think that's where I would then consider going to wide receiver or running back. I got to think that it's not going to be the usual occurrence here that I get to 12 and only 5 quarterbacks are gone, but I know that that does happen in plenty of Superflex drafts. Now it's my turn at the end of the round, so let's unpause this draft. We're going to open up the Draft Shark sidebar. We will see who's recommended to me, and Patrick Mahomes has a non-quarterback ahead of him. I'm going to go ahead and follow what the Draft War Room says. Take CeeDee Lamb at 12. Now it says Patrick Mahomes time. I think it's time because I like Patrick Mahomes quite a bit better than the next couple of quarterbacks on the board. I don't want to wait until all the way at the 3-4 turn to get my QB. Make him my pick. Now I don't have to worry about getting frozen out of the top quarterbacks. So I don't feel like Lamb needs a whole lot of talk at this stage of the draft. I don't feel like Mahomes needs a whole lot of talk at this point either. I do think that there's some separation between Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. I think Patrick Mahomes could this season become more of what Joe Burrow has been his past couple of healthy seasons because he's got a better set of wide receivers now. Like, they worked on it last year. They had their wide receiver core in better shape. They signed Hollywood Brown. They drafted Xavier Worthy early. And then they, of course, lost Brown in August to injury. Then they lost Rice early in the season to injury. So all of a sudden it's the same kind of offense as it was the year before, where there were limited receiving options. We got limited output from Patrick Mahomes. Maybe we don't get that Joe Burrow level of production, but I think that it's possible he gets back to that level this year. I think he has, certainly still the upside, and he's been missing the downfield threat at wide receiver. To me, Shane, Worthy and Brown on his side this year could bring back that downfield game and could really vault his scoring.
I think we've seen the past couple of years the Chiefs try to build out more weapons for Patrick Mahomes, knowing that's what it takes. And then you have the unfortunate injury to Rashee Rice, and everything kind of falls down, like you said, even with Hollywood Brown last season. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be a much better season for Mahomes. Does that put him in that top tier with those 5 that Theo talked about? I don't think so. But if you're picking at the turn at the end of the first round, I love getting Mahomes there for sure.
Yeah, I think he's outside that top 5, but I think there is a Mahomes tier there before we get to the next quarterback. So what do you like coming back to you in round 2?
I like everything here. I think wide receiver is pretty strong. I don't see a quarterback that I love to take 2 back-to-back. But I think I'm going to dip my toe in the running back ranks. I'm going to take Christian McCaffrey here at the 207. I think of all the running backs left, Christian McCaffrey maybe is the best chance to be a potential RB1 overall in fantasy this year. I think the injuries really soured people last season. We saw him struggle through that year, but we know what Christian McCaffrey brings to the table in PPR leagues. I just think the upside is tremendous. And so, him and Hurts, the touchdowns, the receptions from McCaffrey, I think gives this team a lot of potential starting out with these first 2 picks.
Yeah, Theo, what do you think of McCaffrey for this season?
He's interesting because he's steamed up big time. You're starting to see him go like top 8 in FFPC main events. He's steamed up into the first round on Underdog, first round NFFC. I'd probably be a little bit more comfortable taking him in like a single QB format somewhere in the early second round. I just think when you weigh McCaffrey versus some of those truly elite wide receivers, I tended to lean to guys like Malik Neighbors, head to head when it comes down to it. I mean, but you can make a big argument for McCaffrey. This has been a guy that's been just sort of a fantasy football weapon of mass destruction. San Francisco says he's fully healthy. I guess I'm just a little bit of an ageist, and I don't like betting on guys who missed a lot of time the year before to come back super strong. And also, even if we take away the game where McCaffrey played a partial game, you're talking about a guy who was like 14 points per game last year. And I know he was banged up, but for him to drop to around 14 points per game, and then we want him to jump back up into that 20, 21 points per game, because that's really what you're betting on if you're taking him at that level of the draft. So for me, I'm probably neutral on McCaffrey rather than, hey, this is a guy that I need to really make part of my draft strategy.
Isn't it fun to go online and talk about how old guys are when they're like 10, 15, 18 years younger than we are?
100%. 100%.
Yeah, that's all fair on Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, we're at the mercy of the sleeper draft room here. We are using their bots that should be set for this format, but I'm not sure you're going to see this few quarterbacks go off the board in round 2. So probably, Theo, you've got a bit more staring at you at the end of round 2 than normal, don't you think?
Yeah, this is unusual. I mean, I'm for sure going to take Bo Nix with one of these picks. I think Nix as a QB2, if that's a massive sort of cheat code for you. He's got some rushing upside. They've improved the weapons around him. And Nix showed us that he was capable of dropping immense spike weeks. So now really for me, it's which way do I go with the 301? I think I'm going to go with Devon Achane here. Wide receiver was hit pretty hard. I would have loved to have gotten a guy like a Nico Collins here. I could definitely consider an A.J. Brown. I think he's fine in this level. And certainly tight end, the two tight ends that I would have considered here are gone. So for me, I think Achane is the edge pick here, and I'm going to go with him.
So it sounds like you don't have A.J. Brown close to Nico Collins and maybe some other wide receivers in that range?
I think A.J. is fine. I just think when you're talking about chasing wide receivers, we want wide receivers that are capable of leading the NFL in targets and catches. That's been the way for us to find the wide receiver 1 overall. It's been 4 straight seasons where the wide receiver 1 overall has led the league in catches and targets. Last year, of course, Jamar Chase hit the trifecta, also led the league in yardage and also led the league in touchdown catches. When it comes to A.J. Brown, this is a guy that's going to get a absolute ton of target share. This is going to get a lot of first read rates. And I think A.J. Brown, sort of the way that he can get me is if he's close to leading the NFL in touchdown catches, which certainly with A.J. Brown, you have a chance to see. But at the end of the day, I have Devon Achane ahead in my rankings, so I'm sort of deferring to them. AJ's fine though, Matt. I don't want to go on the record. I'm very pro AJ Brown. I'm not negative AJ Brown, but I do prefer a couple of these other wide receivers.
You heard it here. Theo is from the New York City area, so he hates AJ Brown. He says AJ Brown is going to kill your fantasy season. No, I highlighted him because I wonder if maybe a side effect of Saquon Barkley's 2024 is AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts getting slightly underrated heading into this year, especially for best ball purposes. I agree with you that AJ Brown's not going to get the total target volume that is likely needed for him to lead the position in scoring, but I think that he belongs a little bit higher versus the other guys at the position, especially for best ball purposes, because he retains the exact same amount of spike week potential that he had before. He missed a few games last season, along with Davante Smith missing a few games, along with Dallas Goedert missing a bunch of games. That all, I think, helped feed into Philly's extreme rushing lean. And I know that this is going to be a team that's always going to be right around that 50-50 run pass split. But last year they were at about 44% pass rate. I think that is going to correct closer to where they have been and probably give a bit more passing volume to that offense than people are projecting at this point. Shane, why don't you tell us about what you did in the middle of round 3?
I went with T. Higgins at the 306. There's a number of quarterbacks I still like. I have kind of a bigger tier here, so hoping to get one of those in the 4th round. And wide receiver, Brown, like you talked about, I would have been ecstatic to get him in the 3rd round. He goes 1 pick before me. So I'm going with Higgins. Is maybe a little bit safer of a selection. He was a wide receiver 1 in points per game last season with Joe Burrow. Higgins missed games here and there over last season. I'm not too worried about the injury issues, or if he misses a couple games, that's fine, even for my wide receiver 1. But we know the Bengals are going to throw the football, and we know with Jamar Chase going to draw that coverage. I don't think Jamar Chase is going to hit the trifecta again. That's going to be a little bit more for T. Higgins this season. And I think he's still continues to be underrated in every fantasy draft that I'm in.
Anybody who's watching on YouTube can certainly see how the picks are going. I want to do a quick recap for anybody who's listening instead of watching this. So we talked about the first round having 5 quarterbacks. The 3 guys went first: Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels. Then it was Jamar Chase, Bijan Robinson, Jalen Hurts to Shane at 6, Joe Burrow at 7, Justin Jefferson, Brock Bowers at 9, which seems way early to me in this kind of format. But, again, it's a bot drafting that one. So Jahmyr Gibbs after that, Saquon Barkley. Then I took CeeDee Lamb, Patrick Mahomes at the 1-2 turn, Malik Neighbors, Ashton Genty, Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, then Christian McCaffrey to Shane's team, Trey McBride, Lad McConkey, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr. Then we had Theo go, Bo Nix, Devon Achane at the turn, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Garrett Wilson, and A.J. Brown before Shane's turn in round 3. Then Bucky Irving, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Justin Herbert, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Josh Jacobs in round 3, bringing it up to me at the end of the turn. Theo, anything in round 3 or otherwise, if there are other players, stand out to you so far, either as, guys that you're targeting this year or guys that you think are going way too early?
T. Higgins, I agree with you, is a really, really strong value here. I think that offense is going to be very, very consolidated. And we saw just how dominant T. Higgins could be on a per game basis. How dominant he was in the fantasy football playoffs. That game against Denver sort of put a lot of people in great position to win their fantasy leagues. And they rewarded him with a huge contract this offseason. I like him a lot. Obviously, I think Justin Herbert, based on the sleeper ADP, is a great value to team number 9. Some bot is actually having a pretty strong draft with the Bowers London Herbert start there. I like Herbert there. I think he's in a position to succeed this season. No real surprises. It seems about correct. I probably would have flip-flopped the Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, but everything else looks pretty good.
My draft war room is telling me that Breece Hall is a strong value at 312. So I'm going to go ahead and believe that. I think part of that is how far down the board quarterbacks are going in this draft. So, I could say in a more typical Superflex draft, I think more quarterbacks would be gone and I'll take a quarterback here. But instead, I'm just going to follow how this draft goes because I think that's really a key to winning a draft is playing that draft. So I'm going to take Breece Hall at the end of round 3. I have no problem at all with the value right there. And he popped as the strongest value. Tyreek Hill is next up on my board. Rashee Rice is right behind him. I already have Patrick Mahomes. So I'm going to go ahead and make the bet on Rashee Rice instead of Tyreek Hill. I wouldn't say that stacking is a specific strategy for me in lineup setting leagues. I think it really can get you into trouble and you don't really want to use it very much. That said, if Patrick Mahomes really pays off for me at that 1-2 turn, I think Rashee Rice is going to be a key part of that. He was on his way to wide receiver 1 level production last year. So I think those two are going to either propel me or hurt me in tandem. And I'll go ahead and take my shot with Rice in this case. Tyreek Hill also, I like the value on him. I'm willing to draft him where he's going. I think that his current price bakes in the risk, but there is some risk to him. We don't even know, for one thing. I wouldn't be shocked if this offseason still includes a Tyreek Hill trade at some point over the summer. He also might just be a player in decline at this point. So not super worried, but there are concerns about him. Theo, where are you at on Tyreek Hill heading into this season?
I had him ranked 45th in my redraft rankings. Like I did a write-up. You can access it at Fantasy Points. It's free, where I gave my top 50. It's expanding to a top 100, and I did write-ups of each player. And I put Hill at 45, which I think is about as low as I can put him without getting potentially burned. But again, it's like I talked about with McCaffrey. You're talking about a guy, Matt, that I know there was a lot of Tua Tagovailoa missing, Hill potentially playing banged up, but it's a guy who dropped over 10% in his target share, was a 30+% target share player in 2023, dropped down to around 20 last year. Points per game were similar, dropped about 10 PPR points per game. I mean, those are big red flags. And when we see speed wide receivers starting to decline that much, you have to wonder if there's going to be further decline and not necessarily some big bounce back. So by ranking him 45th, I'm not going to have too much Tyreek Hill this year because he's going in some of these higher stakes drafts around like the 2-3 turn area. That's just a little too rich for me.
Yeah, I agree. The fact that he relies so heavily on his speed, adds risk because obviously that's one of the first things to go as your body just naturally ages. I feel like he's going to be the kind of player that we're either looking back on, by midseason, certainly at the end of the year, and we're like, oh man, the people who got Tyreek Hill really made out, or like we really should have looked at last season as more of a decline than we did. Shane, where are you at on Tyreek Hill? I don't think we've specifically talked about him.
I think I'm a little rosier than you two. I guess I think that Dolphins offense as a whole just took such a step back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's going to be that bad again this year. We probably aren't going to get 2023, the high flying offense and Tyreek Hill going off, but I still think he had enough skills on film. He's still getting open when the offensive line's breaking down and then Tua's not putting the ball in the right place. I think Tyreek can still get open at his age. So I think it'll be better. Even here at the 4-7, I'm debating, do I take Tyreek Hill or do I take a quarterback? Because the tough thing about picking in the middle of a draft is the runs can happen, and I don't know. So I'm going to take Kyler Murray just over Tyreek Hill, just to play it safe. I mean, Kyler Murray has been a QB1 in points per game every season of his NFL career. And even last season, the rushing went down for him. His designed runs were lessened. But in the second half of the season, Arizona did pass the ball more. And I think they keep James Conner healthy. If they're looking like, hey, we could be a playoff team this year, we got to keep Conner a little more fresh. I think we see a little bit more Kyler Murray throwing, maybe even a little bit more rushing. I think Marvin Harrison takes a step forward. Trey McBride now the highest paid tight end. I like this Cardinals offense, and I'm happy to get Murray as my QB2.
Yeah, I think I probably made it sound like I'm a bit more dire on Tyreek Hill than I really am. I think he's fine at his current price because even if he, doesn't get back close to what he was before last season, there's still room for him to be fine at the price where he's going right now. And I agree, like the whole Dolphins offense was a bit goofy last year, due at least in part to Tua missing a bunch of time right there in the first half of the season. Things never really got back on track. Theo, at the end of round 4, you of course had the 2 picks. Why don't you tell us why you went with the 2 players that you did?
Yeah, so there was a couple of players that I considered here. I like Davante Adams a lot. I think he's being a little bit underrated in the market. Was over 17 points per game last year. Now we see him get to a way more than functional offense after being on 2 bottom 8 offenses last year. I'm very excited to see how he performs in a Sean McVay-led offense with Matt Stafford at quarterback. We saw how consolidated that wide receiver room was between Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp when they were fully healthy in some of those weeks where Kyren Williams fantasy scoring sort of took a back seat. And I think it could be similar with Adams and Puka Nacua. Nacua is certainly the alpha there. But Matt, we've seen it in multiple years where sometimes defenses try to take away a primary option in a Sean McVay offense, and you get these absurd target totals where a guy gets like 19, 20 targets. And I think you could see some huge spike weeks out of Adams. We know how effective he is in the red zone, and it's just an opportunity for him to have another really, really strong season. And then I probably should have gone wide receiver. I'm probably going to regret it when it comes around with my next pick. But Chase Brown, to me, is just such a value here. I have him ranked very, very highly in my rankings over at Fantasy Points. He was so good last season. Like we talked about with T. Higgins, it's an offense that's just easy to bet on. Brown is a two-way talent with minimal threats behind him. I like Taj Brooks, but I don't think he's the sort of guy that's going to challenge him. And Brooks also has to overcome Zach Moss, Samaje Perine, some of those veterans there. Chase Brown, I think, could have a really, really strong season, put up RB1 numbers. So I sort of leaned into what I thought was the edge pick here with Brown to go along with Achane, where I have really, really a lot of strength at my running back positions.
I agree with you. I'm a little wary of Chase Brown when he goes inside the top 12, but he's RB 15 here. So I think that's an at least fine spot to take him and certainly could pay off big. Davante Adams is interesting because we've seen the Rams be able to support multiple wide receivers in the past. Maybe the most interesting thing with him is that he's at an age where we should be wary of a wide receiver, but the Rams gave up on Cooper Kupp and then signed a guy who is a little bit older than Cooper Kupp. So we saw Davante Adams not really show decline last year. The Rams are telling us they don't think he's declining. They think he's still very good. So I'm in on Davante Adams where he's going this year as well because of the offense that he's in. Okay, so we did see Tyreek Hill go just before that 4-5 turn for Theo. Sam Laporta right before that. Drake May before that. Caleb Williams followed the Kyler Murray pick for Shane last time. Since the 4-5 turn, we had Terry McLaurin leave the board, Tet McMillan, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff. So Shane, you are back up in the middle of round 5. Already have 2 quarterbacks on your roster, plus McCaffrey and T. Higgins. What do you like here?
I'm going to go back into receiver. I think when you got to start 3, I'm going to dip back into that element. With Higgins being a little safer to me on a per game basis, I'm going to swing a little bit more and take DJ Moore, wide receiver for the Bears here. I love Ben Johnson. I love his offense in Detroit. I think with the amount of weapons he has there in Chicago, it's going to translate. And I think DJ Moore is the best weapon that they have on that squad, his ability to play the slot, play outside. We've seen the consistency. If there's one real beneficiary from that coaching change on the Chicago Bears, I think it's going to be DJ Moore. And I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up back-end wide receiver 1 numbers throughout the season.
I really like DJ Moore this season. I like the value on him here. We've talked a lot about the Bears offense. So Theo, why don't you tell me, what do you think of the Bears offense heading into the season overall and specific players? And then I'll get to my picks after that.
Yeah, no, I think Moore is fine here. I have him at 43rd in my rankings, which is probably a little bit lower than consensus. The only thing I will say is there's a lot of mouths to feed. So talking about DJ Moore, I think he's got a capped ceiling. I think that the rookies, Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, are going to get work. We know that Rome Odunze is going to take a step forward in year 2. So there's just a lot of mouths to feed, but DJ Moore is clearly the lead dog for this season. Not so sure about way down the line with those 2 younger wide receivers, but DJ Moore is obviously in a good place. And I wonder, Matt, sort of as a big galaxy brain thought, we saw just how balanced Detroit was and how they leaned into the running game with Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator. Now it sort of seems like his team is tailor-made to be a lot more pass happy. So I wonder if we see like a 57% pass attempt team instead of like the closer to 50-50 that we saw with that balance in Detroit. And then it would be a boon to sort of all the Chicago pass catchers. Just when you look at the DeAndre Swift, Roshan Johnson running backs versus the talent and depth and quality that they have at wide receiver and tight end, I think this could be a really pass-happy offense this year.
The Chicago Ben Johnson situation is going to be very interesting no matter how it plays out. I think all of us collectively, fantasy analysts, probably overrate how much we know about coaches in general. Like, we all tend to look at a coach's history and say, well, this is how he does things. At the same time, we all collectively, fantasy and NFL people, talk about how smart a coach Ben Johnson is. So if you think he is an offensive genius, then you have to believe that he's not just a run heavy guy and he's going to implement that run heaviness wherever he goes. You have to believe that in Detroit, he went that way either because Dan Campbell wanted to lean that way or because the talent dictated it. They had a very good backfield. You want to give Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery the ball plenty. In Chicago, as you just talked about, nowhere near the backfield. None of the players in that Chicago backfield right now is as good as either of the players at the front of the Detroit backfield. Meanwhile, they're stockpiling passing pieces. They have the quarterback that they drafted first overall last year. We'll see if Caleb Williams is as good as that pick, but he's at least talent-wise as good as that pick. They got Colston Loveland. They got Luther Burden. They already had DJ Moore. They already had Rome Odunze, a first-round pick from last year. Cole Kmet's an expensive tight end. So clearly they are built out better to throw the ball than to run the ball. So he should be leaning past this year as long as the quarterback is ready to support it. I'm very interested to see how all of it plays out. DJ Moore is my favorite because he's the one proven guy among all those guys. You can point to Rome Odunze, Colston Loveland, whoever you want and say, I like him. I think he's going to be good. DJ Moore is the one guy that I can point to and say, I already know he's good and he's not old. So there's no reason Chicago should dislike him. He should get the ball plenty. He might have the best quarterback of his career right now. We'll see if Caleb Williams lives up to that. So because DJ Moore is not overrated draft cost wise, I'm just going to buy him wherever he's going, and then we'll see exactly how it plays out rather than me trying to get too specific on my prediction for it. Now, I'm up at the 5-6 turn here. And if you're watching when I first brought it up, even though we were talking about other things, when I opened my Draft Shark sidebar, there was no quarterback in sight. We're at the end of round 5. I have one quarterback on my roster. So you would think it's time to draft quarterback. I had Alvin Kamara very easily at the top, well ahead of the next guy on the list who was Chuba Hubbard at that point. I'm like, all right, I'll go ahead and trust the draft war room, hit Alvin Kamara. And then, of course, after that pick, We had the reshuffling, and now we've got 3 quarterbacks at the top, which is what I anticipated happening. We still have Justin Fields on the board. We still have Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence. So I took the running back. Now I've got my pick of those quarterbacks. I like all those guys. I think they all have top 12 upside. Justin Fields and Dak Prescott, for me, are top 12 quarterbacks heading into the season. I think that they're both underrated. I'm going to take Justin Fields because he's already showed us just how high his upside goes. I mean, at the very least, he's going to run for plenty of yards. He's going to give us that production on the ground, and he has displayed top 8 upside. So I'll take that on a team that has already paid him as though he's going to be their clear starter for at least this year and maybe for the next 2 years. Theo, you're down in that area. What do you think of Justin Fields fantasy wise?
I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of RPO, and I think you're going to see Justin Fields being utilized as a runner. I think New York wants to run, and I think they're going to hyper target Garrett Wilson. I think that Fields has been a guy that's been very, very effective for us in fantasy every time he's started. We also, with the Jets, I think they're going to be a much improved offensive line. We saw them draft Armand Membu this NFL draft. There's just a lot to like about Fields' situation and the lack of pressure behind him. It would take really the floor falling out from under him for them to really put in Tyrod Taylor. So he avoided sort of a really interesting QB2 option behind him in the NFL draft that would put pressure on him. So I think Fields in a really good spot. I think he could be a guy that we're drafting a lot higher than this when we're heading into the 2026 season, a chance to sort of reinvent himself in New York.
Mm-hmm. Shane, what are you looking at in the middle of round 6 here?
There's a lot of options here in the middle of round 6. I'm looking at running back, the draft war room as James Conner, David Montgomery at the top, but I do like this tier of running backs. I feel like I maybe could get one next round. Wide receiver, I'm not thrilled by any of the options. Xavier Worthy, DK Metcalf, top the draft war room there. So I think I'm going to dip at running back. I think I'm going to go with James Conner. I'm not a person that's worried about, oh, you can't draft a quarterback and a running back from the same team. And I don't expect James Conner necessarily to be fully healthy this season. I mean, he's missed a game in each of the past 5 seasons at least, but he continues to be underrated. People just think the wheels are going to fall off. They just signed him to a 2-year deal, and he was an RB1 in points per game last season. They're going to utilize him in the passing game and the running game. I think he's the lead back. I don't see downside of James Conner unless he suffers a major injury.
Now, when you say you don't expect him to be fully healthy this season, you mean he is fully healthy heading into the season, but you're not under the impression that you need him to go a full 17 games.
Yeah, he's going to miss games. Like, that's what James Conner does. Right. We only had one last year, so I expect more this year. But once again, points per game basis is really what I care about. I can replace him in the lineup if I know he's not going to play.
Especially the further into the draft that you get, I think that factor matters less. And clearly Arizona has said with its checkbook that it believes he's still good enough to lead the backfield. It wants him to lead the backfield. Just to catch up on some picks, after that DJ Moore selection in round 5, we got George Kittle, Jordan Love, Mike Evans, Joe Mixon, Travion Henderson off the board before my Alvin Kamara, Justin Fields turn. Then after Fields, we got Devontae Smith, Travis Hunter, Kenneth Walker, Chuba Hubbard, Quinshon Judkins, then that Connor pick for Shane, RJ Harvey after that, Xavier Worthy, Dak Prescott, Zay Flowers, and then Theo at the turn. Theo, what'd you like at that 6-7 turn?
I would have liked to have gotten Xavier Worthy there. I think he would have been a big edge pick at this late in the draft. Huge scoring numbers for him down the stretch, which are sort of being discounted because people will say Rashee Rice, the situation there, it's going to flip all the way back to Rice. But I think with Worthy, there's a chance that you really can't put that back in the bag. 19 points or more in, I believe, 5 of his last 7 games, including the Super Bowl, and also the sort of speed he has in that offense. You talked about earlier with Patrick Mahomes, just the quality at wide receiver. Worthy can end up being sort of the spike week guy in that offense, which could be really fun. So I would have liked to have had him. DK Metcalf, I think, is fine, though. This is a guy that was paid an absolute fortune. I know that we look at the past and Arthur Smith-led offenses don't necessarily target their wide receiver 1. We've never seen a guy go north of like 120 targets in that offense. And the wide receiver 2 in that offense is pretty much non-existent. But when it comes to DK, I think he's going to get a lot of high-value looks. I think it's going to be a ton of play action this year. And I think DK, the lack of target competition around him, the amount of money they paid him, and just his role in that offense, I think you're looking at DK Metcalf's best fantasy season in about 3 seasons. Really a good spot for him. And Jameson Williams has been a guy that I've been continually drafting pretty much every chance I get. In the FFPC Hardway draft, I took Jameson Williams. I've taken him in some dynasty startup drafts. I don't think the market is quite there with what Williams could be. We've seen John Morton, the new offensive coordinator in Detroit, sort of singing his praises, saying he's going to have a breakout season. Only 91 targets last year, but scored 14.2 points per game. This is a guy that we've really been sort of waiting for a season like last year. And with the offensive coordinator change, I wonder if the wrinkle in Detroit could be utilizing Jameson Williams even more. And we see his fantasy scoring take up another level, only 24 years old.
I think his ADP is fine for me because I think that there are a lot of guys in that offense. It's tough for me to see him getting a whole lot more unless we're taking a bunch away from either the run game or from Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I guess first, if you are high on Williams this year, are you then down on Amon-Ra St. Brown at cost?
No, I think Amon-Ra's fine. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is a really good pick. I think when it's Detroit, there's some people out there that are just a little bit nervous about them losing Ben Johnson. And they seem like an offense that they've just been so good that there'd been a little bit of natural regression. But I think that just the amount of talent they have is at too high of a level. And the offensive line, probably the best in football again. So for me, I don't know if it's necessarily an Amon-Ra St. Brown fade to say that I really, really like Jameson Williams. I think for me, the one that I'm probably fading at ADP is Sam Laporta, just because I like the 3 tight ends going ahead of him more than he is. And I don't know if he's going to give you a massive edge, having to sort of push up tight end 4 in some of these formats. So I think it's really a Jameson Williams versus Laporta bet for me, where I think Williams is going to give you a lot more return on investment than Laporta would. But they're all fine. It's the Lions. We shouldn't overthink it. They're going to score a lot of points this year. It's very functional offense.
To be fair, though, even the Lions scored a lot of touchdowns for the Lions last year. I think we're going to see some regression coming there. I think somebody in this offense and maybe a couple of somebodies are going to disappoint. We've talked plenty on our shows about Jahmyr Gibbs's risk at the price where he's going. I think it's fair to really, like, there are so many different ways this could go. It's fair, I think, to take any direction. Like, I think this guy's going to pull from this guy, and then we're going to see exactly how it works out. I think the important point is to make sure that if there is somebody that you like getting more in an offense, you got to think about how it's going to impact the rest of the offense, what needs to change to make that happen. So I like hearing that connection between Williams and Laporta. I want to go back to Xavier Worthy, though, because you said people are discounting what he did last year, and I'm people, because I think the market has him overrated because of how he finished last season. And it really was that very end of season stretch where he had these 3 fairly big scoring weeks for him, wide receiver 16, 11, and 15, right at the end of the regular season, weeks 15 through 17, had the very good playoffs, had the huge Super Bowl, but that one was inflated by a second half that was not a game. I mean, the Eagles were playing backups. So that was fertile ground for Xavier Worthy to put up points. My concern with him is he wasn't even a high volume guy last year. He was from week 5 through the playoffs. That's after Rashee Rice went down. And I know that he saw some growth even within that range, but just within that span, week 5 through the playoffs, 44th among wide receivers in target share, 49th in yardage share, 31st in TD share. So we saw some pretty good touchdown luck for Worthy last year. I think he's well set up to be a touchdown luck player. He's speedy. He's in an offense that's good. He's playing with Patrick Mahomes. So I think he's going to score touchdowns well. I think that his volume is going to disappoint a lot of fantasy managers this year. I think that he probably went a little bit later in this draft. I'm not going to count through all the wide receivers, but where he's going regularly, I don't like him at cost. I think he's going to be one of those players that proves to be a poor value when we get to the end of the season.
To be determined, Matt. We'll revisit this mid-season. I think also, like, just to look at Worthy, I understand your arguments, but he was 21 years old. And like you said, it took him a little while to kind of get going before they leaned on him with the touches. You also get the X factor of the manufactured rushing attempts that they give him, which for a guy like Worthy, those matter. So I don't know. I think he's definitely a range of outcomes guy, but I would definitely want to have a little bit of exposure to him this season, even if I've got to use a premium pick here and there.
Yeah, he was young, but he also didn't have Rashee Rice for almost the whole season, had no Hollywood Brown basically, and had apparently an overweight Travis Kelce. So I think he's going to get squeezed on the target front, but again, like you said, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Shane, let's go back to you now because you are up in the middle of round 7. After Theo's turn, we had Trevor Lawrence, Rome Odunze, TJ Hawkinson, Caleb Johnson go. And before we get to your pick, if you want to weigh in on Xavier Worthy, then please feel free.
As usual, I'm somewhere in the middle of, when mommy and daddy fight and Jared and Matt fight, I'm usually lining up somewhere in the middle. Like I don't love Worthy. If I did, I would have taken him in the last round over James Conner because I do think there's going to be some inconsistency. But I do recognize what Theo says. He was a young receiver. They took in the first round. They're still going to utilize him. I don't think we see Xavier Worthy blow up to be a wide receiver 1, but maybe has some of the spike weeks. I'm okay with him at value, but I don't love it. Here in the 7th, Theo kind of screwed me over and taking 2 receivers. Like I probably should take my 3rd receiver here, but I like the running back value too much. I took my floor play in James Conner as my RB2. So I'm going to take an upside play so we can keep talking about the Chiefs. I'm going to take Isiah Pacheco here at the 706. I just think fully healthy, hopefully going into this season, almost a year removed from that leg fracture that clearly slowed him down when he came back. He was not fully 100% when he came back. And I think the Chiefs offense, like we talked about, is going to be better than it was last season. But I think part of that is going to be utilizing Isiah Pacheco a bit more. Didn't face much competition. They drafted Rashard Smith in the 7th round. I don't think there's any real threat to Pacheco, even with Elijah Mitchell coming in. I think Pacheco is going to be the lead guy. And to get that on a potential high-powered offense in the 7th round in a Superflex draft, I'm down every time.
Just to put a bow on Worthy, I did go back and count the wide receivers. He's wide receiver 25 here. I think that price is fine. He has been typically going inside the teens. And like Shane mentioned, Jared and I have argued about Worthy. I don't think that's done. And I think we have Worthy ranked too high on our site. But that's why we podcast, so that I can say stuff like that. And then, majority puts the players where they go. Before we get to my picks, though, Theo, I want your thoughts on Isiah Pacheco because he's a guy that I've been talking up all off season. I love the upside on him at his cost.
I think the price is really right to invest in him. He's so beat up, especially on underdog. The underdog market is treating him sort of like the bottom of the barrel, where you're really only having to use a moderate RB3 price tag. And I think he's going to be easy to handcuff. I think if I'm going to bet on a second back there, it's probably Rashard Smith, who's essentially free. So I'm getting access to Pacheco at a lot cheaper than probably I should. And Matt, if we're trying to identify guys that are going to be drafted higher as the summer moves along, there's been a lot of Andy Reid positive coach speak on Isiah Pacheco. I think every time Andy Reid opens his mouth over the next few weeks, you're going to see Pacheco sort of creep up and up and up a little bit. So I think he's fine. When it comes to Pacheco, I'm not sure the massive ceiling. Will we see another RB1 season like we did in 2023? Not so sure. I think he'd have to score a lot of rushing touchdowns. But for the price that he went to Shane, then you're talking about a guy who could give you, low-end RB2 numbers, and he's still delivering ADP value here.
Yeah, and as I've said on our shows, like it was fine to me to be wary of him heading into the offseason, but the Chiefs' moves have said they still believe in Pacheco. They think he wasn't healthy at the end of last season, and they're still ready for him to lead the backfield. So I love him. It's my turn. I'm going to resume the draft and then check my war room here at the end of round 7. So I've got 2 quarterbacks just to look at my team. CeeDee Lamb in round 1, Patrick Mahomes, Breece Hall in round 3, Rashee Rice, Alvin Kamara, Justin Fields. Now we're back to my turn at the end of round 7. It's the 7-8 turn. I've got CeeDee Lamb, Patrick Mahomes, Breece Hall, Rashee Rice, Alvin Kamara, Justin Fields. So I've got my 2 quarterbacks to start. I've got my 2 starting running backs. I've got 2 wide receivers, but another starting spot to fill there. The draft war room tells me it's a good time to take another wide receiver. Courtland Sutton up top, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave right below them. Courtland Sutton would be fine. I don't particularly like Courtland Sutton, to be honest. So I'm going to reach past the top pick in the draft war room, and I'm going to take I could go either way between the other 2 guys. I'll say Olave here just because he is probably his team's wide receiver 1, whereas Jalen Waddle is probably still the wide receiver 2 in Miami. Again, I could go either way between those guys. And now we'll open it back up with that wide receiver on my roster now. Draft War Room says Tua is the guy that I should go ahead and target as my QB3. I mean, where you take your QB3 in these drafts, to me, depends at least somewhat on where you took your other 2 quarterbacks. My second quarterback was not until the beginning of round 6. Plenty of players off the board. I like Justin Fields. I think he's going to be an every week starter for me. But if I'm just looking at where that quarterback comes, this is a good time to go ahead and take the third. And plus, I'm never going to regret having a solid third quarterback in a super flex format. So I'm fine with this recommendation. I'm going to go ahead and take Tua here, and then we will go ahead to Shane's turn. Shane, what do you like in the middle of round 8?
I definitely need a receiver. I have my 2 quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray. I have 3 running backs now in Christian McCaffrey, James Conner, and Isiah Pacheco. One thing I like to do in the draft war room as we're hitting 8th, 9th round is just flip on upside mode just to check. Upside mode gives you some of those more ceiling projections and lets those guys with big upside move up your draft board a little bit, because I like to start drafting for upside at this point. But the top player on my board, whether I have it checked or not, is Chris Godwin, receiver for the Buccaneers, and I'm all in there. I think his season on a points per game basis obviously got hurt pretty early, as a small sample, but he was a one season. Drafting Emeka hurts a little bit, but I think Godwin's going to retain his role in that Tampa Bay offense with Liam Cohen moving on, and I still trust that he's going to put up some pretty good numbers as my wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I would say what they paid Chris Godwin at the start of free agency says that we shouldn't worry about the impact of Emeka Egbuka. Going to be an interesting offense this year. That brings us to you, Theo, at the 8-9 turn. Just to recap on some other picks, Cam Ward followed 2 off the board. Michael Penix gone. Jalen Waddle after that. Tyler Warren. Cortland Sutton right before Shane's pick. Then Godwin, Jerry Jeudy, DeAndre Swift, Tyrone Tracy, Mark Andrews. Theo, before we hear about your picks, I know that you said you're fairly high on Jerry Jeudy at cost this year, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that both Browns' skill position players are pass catching weapons, are both very, very strong values. David Njoku at tight end and Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver. Jerry Jeudy had 140 targets last year, finished as the wide receiver 12, minimal wide receiver target competition around him. You talked about Chris Olave. I think the market is really beating up these wide receiver 1s on bad offenses with questions at quarterback. And of course, we don't want to drive the cost of these guys up. But if Chris Olave stays healthy this year, I think he's also a really, really strong value where you drafted him. But Jeudy took a big step forward last year, Matt. And I think it's a guy that drafters are still punishing for what he did in Denver rather than the sort of outlook he has in Cleveland. Had a massive contract given to him, played really, really well on the field. And when we talk about target share, he didn't have some immense target share last year. Elijah Moore is gone as well. Elijah Moore was a guy who had a career high in catches, had a higher utilization than some people realize. So I think Judy's in a really, really strong spot. And you're starting to see him just slide and slide and slide in formats like Underdog. I've really, really liked him a lot as a best ball pick. And I think in managed leagues as well, he's going to be a guy that if you have him as your wide receiver 3 or as your flex, he could end up being a really big edge pick to you.
Last year was really kind of a wacky season in the Cleveland offense and makes it hard for us to really know what to expect. Like, you know, it was an offense to basically avoid. And then Deshaun Watson went down. And then they finally got to Jameis Winston, and he gave us that production that we always get, gave us the interceptions that knocked him out of the lineup. But, you know, gave us that production, pumped up these wide receivers. And now, Theo, we're kind of like, we have to figure out what to do with it. I'm with you that Jerry Jeudy is a nice value. I think the offense makes it hard to get super excited about players, but I think the key is not necessarily to get super excited, but rather to just look at the values and think about, you know, Jerry Jeudy is at least fine in low wide receiver 3 range. Maybe he doesn't really pay off big time from there, but maybe he does. I think he's a good enough player to potentially do so. David Njoku, we've talked about, we like him at Draft Sharks. We think he's a strong value. So certainly targeting Njoku. I mean, Cedric Tillman is going late enough where you can either believe in him or not, just take some shots and see what happens. It's an interesting offense, especially because of the quarterback situation that none of us knows right now how it's going to play out. I think we'll talk about that after we get through our picks in these first 10 rounds. So now that we talked some on Jerry Jeudy, what'd you do at that 8-9 turn?
Yeah, so at the 8-9 turn, I went with Jawan Jennings and Calvin Ridley. It's really wide receiver cleanup. Ridley's sort of the same argument where it's a beat-up offense. You're seeing Ridley getting pushed down. If Cam Ward can just come in and be a functional quarterback, I think Ridley's going to really return a lot of value this year. This has been a guy that I don't think really has the immense ceiling to sort of do what Terry McLaurin did last year in terms of the fantasy scoring. But we've seen it for like multiple times over where some of these wide receiver ones get a quarterback upgrade and run with it. Last year we saw it with Cortland Sutton and McLaurin. I think this year we could see it with Ridley. I think where I got him was a very, very strong value. And then Jennings has been a guy that I've sort of been flag planting across multiple formats. Last year we saw him take a huge step forward. This year, it's sort of this ambiguous wide receiver room of San Francisco wide receivers where some people love Ricky Pearsall. Some people are betting on a injury discount Brandon Ayuk. But I'm going to stick with Juwan Jennings. This was Brock Purdy's guy last year. Jennings showed us with the spike weeks what he could do. But I think this year you're going to see a little bit more week-to-week consistency. Jennings was like 14 points per game last year, and I think he could be north of that this year. So I think he's a really strong value, especially in best ball.
And I think especially because he's not going super early. If he was, wide receiver 25 off of last year, I'd be like, I don't know about Juwan Jennings, but where he's going and certainly where you got him here, I agree. You just mentioned in best ball, I think we fantasy analysts often say, oh, this guy's better in best ball. To me, Calvin Ridley is kind of the opposite, where I like him better in a lineup setting league where I'm not sure he has that ceiling, which I think you just said a few minutes ago. I'm not sure he has that ultimate ceiling to explode, but he really has a potentially very nice floor this year, probably better than we've seen from him in the past, where he could be a guy who gets, helpful targets and thus helpful production on top of that every week, not every week, but most weeks throughout the year.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, Ridley, it's not going to be a pick that you make where people in your league are like, oh my God, what a pick. But he's going to be a guy that I think you're going to be really happy you have on your roster.
Yeah. So Shane, what do you like in the middle of round 9 here?
Well, Theo took Juwan Jennings the 12. Brandon Ayuk went at the 9:05. And on our Sleepers podcast last week, I highlighted Ricky Pearsall. I'm one of those Ricky Pearsall guys, Theo. So I'm going to take Ricky Pearsall here just because I think one of those three receivers are really going to work out. I think Pearsall does get the Deebo Samuel role. I'm really excited about his potential. This is a bench spot for me, so I'd rather swing for the upside. And I think a San Francisco receiver room, as crowded as it is, I mean, to get these players in the 8th, 9th round, they could blow up week to week. I think it's worth the swing this late on a passing game with Kyle Shanahan manning the system that we know is going to be pretty efficient.
And at the very least, Shane, you got to put your fake money where your mouth is if you're going to
exactly for the mock drafts. I got to take the guys. Man.
No, Pearsall I think is fine here too. I think that hopefully we have a little bit more clarity as the summer moves along, and I think at least one of these guys is going to creep up a little bit. Certainly, Pearsall will keep an eye on the hamstring. That's certainly we don't want to see a younger wide receiver miss anything. And they say he'll be fine, but you never know. But with Pearsall, I love that you bring up the Deebo Samuel role because we saw Deebo Samuel lead the NFL in rush attempts at the wide receiver position pretty much every single year. With Pearsall, he'll be the manufactured touch guy, but in a different way. So he can end up getting a little bit of a boost in PPR leagues where are they going to use Pearsall around the line of scrimmage to try to emulate what they got out of Deebo for some of those cheap yards, some of those easy button targets. Pearsall is really, really interesting. And I think you can make an argument, Matt and Shane, to taking both of these guys, because if Brandon Ayuk is going to miss certainly the beginning of the season, there's a chance that Pearsall and Jennings can coexist and you can just start both 49ers wide receivers.
I think that you really have to look at the specific situations. A lot of times, if you really like a player in an offense, then it means you have to react negatively toward another player in that offense. But the prices at which they're all going, I think it certainly makes sense to buy into multiple of these 49ers pass catchers, especially with how nebulous the situation is. And, with what we've seen from the offense in general, it's a productive offense. So you want to get pieces of it, even if you're not sure exactly how it's going to play out. I'm up at the 9-10 turn. We're going to draft through round 10, then talk a few sleepers and wrap things up. I had 3 wide receivers at the top of my board, my draft war room at this turn. I took the third guy because I think Jacoby Myers is going to be a better bet for weekly targets than Jaden Reed was ahead of him, and Deebo Samuel ahead of him. So I'll take that guy. For a team that I'm planning to play out through the season, I think Jacoby Myers is going to be a guy I put in my lineup just every week and get that kind of high floor, maybe limited ceiling production. As you can see after that, Jalen Warren pops well ahead of everybody else. Like, I love David Njoku, but I can wait on a tight end, maybe even get Njoku at my next turn. I'm going to go ahead and believe the draft war room that Jalen Warren is a top value here. We saw him go after a bot, took Travis Etienne in this particular draft. So I would be ecstatic if that happens in any real drafts. I would not expect that it does, but I'll take advantage here. Plenty of upside on Jalen Warren, especially because he's not getting drafted at this point like he is a lead back. And, we'll see if he is a lead back, exactly how much he shares with Caleb Johnson. But at the very least, nice value, nice upside on him where he's going this year. Since then, Matthew Golden went, Deebo Samuel, Emeka Ibuka, Jaden Reed, Luther Burden right before Shane's spot. And now we're to Shane in the middle of round 10. Shane, what do you like right here?
Well, I'm going to make sure you don't get David Njoku because he's at the top of my board.
Dang it.
So I'm going to take Njoku here. Well, I think it's just an absolute steal at the tight end position as late as he's going. When we saw him be that primary option, especially in the red zone for the Browns last season, I think with either the young quarterback room or Joe Flacco, either way, I think Njoku's the guy that you rely on, and the athletic skill is there for him to succeed. So I love getting him. If I wait on tight end, he's definitely a target for me.
Theo, what are you doing with this pick to close out round 10?
Well, I was going to take Evan Engram or Njoku, and they both went back-to-back. So for me, I think that I'm going to take Geno Smith here. I think this is a really, really good value to end it. Geno's a guy that I think the market's just a little bit really underrating, where we love all these Raiders. We love Brock Bowers. We love Ashton Genty. We think that this offense could be highly functional with Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll in year one, and we're sort of discounting Geno. He's been a guy on like underdog in those puppy but Superflex drafts. I find myself drafting over and over again. And a lot of times if I'm doing a 3 quarterback build, I love drafting Geno Smith. I think he's going to be closer to what we saw in Seattle in terms of like a QB 15, QB 17 range rather than this like bottom of the barrel pricing. And Shane, I've liked drafting him in dynasty startups as well because he's very, very insulated with that contract heading into next year. And if we think Vegas offense is heading way, way up and up with all this young talent, why not bet on the veteran quarterback as well to sort of give us this strong QB2 numbers?
I love getting those kind of older castaway guys that are quarterbacks. They're going to be starters in Dynasty for multiple years. I mean, they're free right now in the startup drafts pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead and call myself out. I think I'm underrating Geno Smith so far this offseason, just out of, a lack of excitement for the Raiders. But then I look at him and I'm like, well, wait a second. He's been very accurate. He's back with the head coach who had him starting in Seattle. He's got Brock Bowers. He's got Jacoby Myers, who I like. I don't need to be excited to think that he's a solid to good to maybe much better than anticipated player at the level where he's going.
You had Jacob Gibbs on recently on your pod. He's huge on Geno Smith, the talent that he brings. And then just for his underdog price, he's QB 26 on underdog. I mean, that's as long as he doesn't get hurt, delivering at that sort of price tag. I mean, there's a chance he beats that by 10 spots. I think he could finish QB 16, QB 17, and really deliver on that one. And again, very, very easy player to stack as well. You took Jacoby Myers, Jack Besh as well. And then, of course, if you go ahead and draft Brock Bowers, very, very easy to wait and get his quarterback.
Now, looking at your whole team to this point, Theo, and like I said, we're going to go ahead and cut off the draft there because, it gets to less interesting players, I suppose. Lamar Jackson, Bo Nix, Devon Achane, Devontae Adams, Chase Brown, DK Metcalf, Jameson Williams, Jawan Jennings, Calvin Ridley, Geno Smith as your third quarterback there in round 10. If you hadn't started your draft with 2 quarterbacks, would you typically look to get that third quarterback any earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think you made a very good point when you selected Justin Fields that you took a QB2 a little bit later. So again, if I would have waited till let's say round 5 or later, maybe I would have wanted to push QB3 up a little bit. But I felt great. I think Bo Nix, where I got him, was an absolute steal. So QB3 for me is something I was willing to kind of push down and take in round 10. But I think, like you said, it's based on the capital that you gave your QB2, let that influence QB3, and sort of your confidence level on QB2 should also influence where you take QB3.
Yeah, like I said with Justin Fields, I wouldn't typically. So I think he went later than I would actually be able to get him usually. He specifically is a player that I would expect to start every week with Patrick Mahomes. So I might not have taken Tua otherwise on a usual team, but I do want to get a solid third quarterback for this format. We're cutting off these later rounds, but I wanted to, Theo, give you the opportunity to mention maybe a couple of guys that you're taking that you like as sleepers in those double-digit rounds as we get further into the draft, as you're into upside mode in your draft war room. Who are you clicking often in those later rounds?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. And certainly if we talk about underdog, I've wanted to have a lot of access to Isaiah Likely just because we've seen what he's capable of doing in games where Mark Andrews doesn't play. But does he take that next step forward even in games where Andrews is healthy? Do we see a little bit more of a changing of the guard? Certainly what we're seeing with Harbaugh, John Harbaugh sort of saying he wants him to make the Pro Bowl this year. Likely's been a guy that I've sort of been clicking. He goes also very, very cheap in some of these underdog type formats, getting him like tight end 18-ish level. I like Jordan Mason as well. And I'm not anti-Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones is pushed way, way down. I think Jordan Mason could end up getting the goal line work in that offense. And then when you factor in Aaron Jones being an older back, does he potentially miss some time? And we see, like we did last year, Jordan Mason benefiting from the contingent upside of an RB1 around him, missing time. I think those two guys sort of stand out for the guys still on the board. And I'll say for best ball drafters, I think Trey Harris is very, very interesting where he's going because we really like Justin Herbert. This is an offense that I think is going to take a step forward in year two. And I think Trey Harris could cut out something similar to what we saw with Quentin Johnston last year in terms of a role. But does Trey Harris run with it? And I think he definitely could. It was not necessarily a prospect that I'm not part of the Trey Harris hive. And I know there was a Trey Harris hive out there in Dynasty, but I think the landing spot sort of elevates him as a guy who could really, really help us out, specifically in best ball. So I like a lot of these rookie wide receivers where they're going. I think that the market's sort of pushing some of these guys down, but Trey Harris stands out. I think Jaden Higgins is interesting. I think he's going to get an opportunity. And then another guy still on the board that we could have easily selected and not really a sleeper, but Josh Downs. If we see Daniel Jones take over in Indianapolis, I think Josh Downs is going to be in our lineup every single week in fantasy.
I agree. I'm glad to hear you bring up Trey Harris because I like him. I like the landing spot. I like that he went in the second round. I've been targeting him. I like Josh Downs. I've been targeting him. I think he's interesting too because you can take either Colts quarterback late, whether it's Superflex or whether you're taking three quarterbacks in a 1 QB format. I think it's an interesting offense to target. So I like Josh Downs there. Shane, we kind of started talking about the Cleveland situation earlier. Do you think there's any redraft Superflex upside to guessing at a player in that Cleveland quarterback room that is going to have to play out through the summer? You know, people who are doing best ball drafts right now, I think the uncertainty is going to make people push the entire situation down. And I think potentially guessing right could mean big value. Is there any player that you're interested in guessing on right now among those Cleveland quarterbacks?
I'm fine with taking Kenny Pickett late. I think the trade for him early kind of signals to me that, like, hey, here was our expectation heading into the year, not drafting a quarterback till round 3. I don't think either of the rookies start to start the season. Maybe Dylan Gabriel gets a shot at some point. And I think Joe Flacco's fine, but if you're Cleveland, you're probably going to want a little more upside, and I think that's what Pickett's going to bring. So I think it's worth guessing because I actually think this passing game, Theo talked about Jerry Jeudy. I like David Njoku. I think even if they're pretty run heavy with Quinshon Judkins, there's going to be some value to that quarterback in a super flex league where you're going to have some big plays out there. I like Cedric Tillman late to maybe pair with taking a shot. To me, I think Pickett is the player that is most likely to win the job and still offers maybe a little bit of upside for his talent if he does.
Theo, I sort of sorry, go ahead.
I sort of like Flacco, and I understand what you're saying with Pickett. I think at the end of the day, Flacco has familiarity with the coaching staff there. He was there recently, and they had him out there, as the first quarterback on the field for what it's worth in OTAs. And if we're talking about betting on the pass catchers, Joe Flacco supporting David Njoku, I mean, that was like the greatest pairing ever for about half the season when Flacco took over in Cleveland 2 seasons ago. Flacco would be the best thing for us in fantasy football for getting the most out of Judy and Njoku. So selfishly, I'm also really rooting for Joe Flacco in that situation.
The guy that I heard neither of you mention is Shedeur Sanders. And I think he's the guy that's making both of those players underrated and is also making Dylan Gabriel underrated. I think what makes it an interesting situation, especially for best ball drafting and especially in a super flex tournament, is if you guess right, then you could really, get the payoff more so than this draft market that's favoring Sanders over the other players. I think he's the worst bet among the four to start games this year. I agree that Flacco, I think, is the best bet to start. I think Flacco is especially interesting if you get the first couple quarterbacks who maybe one has an early season bye, or maybe you get two quarterbacks with early season buys where the early season starter might help you a little bit more. I think Flacco is especially interesting on that front because I think he's the best bet to open the season as the Cleveland starter. And then maybe we'll see if they want to work in a young guy. I think if you're at the end of your draft and you're like, let me just take somebody that nobody's drafting, Dylan Gabriel is very interesting because they drafted him 2 rounds ahead of Shedeur Sanders. I think that they like him better as a quarterback. He started throughout his college career, was a very productive passer and adds some rushing upside. So I think he's one of those Hail Mary types that especially if you're in a large field tournament, it makes a lot of sense to me to stick on the end of a Superflex roster. That's going to wrap up our Superflex talk. Theo, again, I'm grateful that you joined us. I'm glad to have you along. Why don't you tell people a bit about what you have going on at Fantasy Points?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys having me on. For the Dynasty listeners, Dynasty Life every single week in the podcast and also on Fantasy Points YouTube. Fantasy Football Daily has been the show that I've sort of taken over. Dynasty Life was with me at Player Profiler, and I brought it over to Fantasy Points. But Fantasy Football Daily, I'm dropping 2 or 3 episodes a week. That show's been great. And then I'm doing School of Scott with Scott Barrett, the Two of Us podcast. We did that last year as well, and we're continuing to do it throughout the offseason, dropping that about once a week. All of my written work is over at Fantasy Points and Fantasy Points YouTube as well. So yeah, guys, really appreciate this one, and come check us out over at Fantasy Points as well.
Yeah, glad to have you along as always. Always fun to talk and draft football with you, Theo. You can find more Draft Shark Superflex draft strategy on our website. You can check the DSU section for that and more strategy content. Or if you're super lazy, just Google Superflex draft strategy. You'll find us that way as well. Whether you're playing Superflex, Dynasty, any other format, we want to make sure that Draft Sharks is your unfair advantage.